In this episode, you'll learn about the new reactive, fully non-blocking web framework in Spring 5, which is called Spring WebFlux. A quick note, if you're entirely new to reactive concepts, you should definitely watch out for the dedicated Spring WebFlux series on this site. This episode gives you a quick WebFlux hello world, but it skips a couple of details in doing so. But fear not, these are covered in additional episodes, so let's get started. Open up a web browser and go to the Spring Initializer project generator page. And it's important that you choose a Spring Boot 2.something version, which is milestone 7 as of the recording of this video, because only version 2 includes proper Spring 5 and WebFlux support. Then choose a group ID of your liking, an artifact ID of your liking, and finally, the most important thing, add the reactive web dependency to the project, which will include everything you need to get started with WebFlux. Generate and download the project, extract the zip to somewhere on your hard drive, which I already did, and then simply open up the Maven project in your IDE. Have a look at the POM.xml file, and inside you'll see a few important things. First, Java version is set to 1.8 because that's the minimum requirement for Spring 5. Then you see the starter WebFlux dependency, which pulls in a lot of other dependencies, as well as some testing dependencies. And when you look at the dependency tree in your project, you won't find any Tomcat or Jetty dependencies, but you'll see that the web server used by default is actually Netty. And Spring WebFlux also works with Tomcat or Jetty or any Servlet 3.1 container, but the Spring maintainers decided to make Netty the default server for WebFlux projects. Now, imagine you want to get your first quick reactive REST controller up and running. And because it's Star Wars time at the moment, create a class called Jedi, give it a string name field, and add 2 constructors. One no argument constructor so that we can easily serialize to JSON, and then the constructor with the name field to make it easy to construct Jedis programmatically. And finally, create some getters and setters. Good. Now there's 2 main programming models when talking about Spring 5's reactive web framework. And the one presented in this episode is the good old annotation-based programming model, i.e. the add REST controller model. And for your information, the other one is the Lambda-based functional programming model, which includes router and handler functions and whatnot, in case you read that somewhere online. So create a new class, the Jedi controller, and annotate the class with the add REST controller annotation, just like you would annotate any other normal Spring REST controller. Then create a new hash map, which is going to be our database. Type integer Jedi, and then use a little trick with an anonymous inner class to put one Jedi inside the hash map with ID 1 and name, say, Yoda, and then simply duplicate the line, change the ID to 2, and the name to Luke. Now write a method, start with an annotation actually, add get mapping with a value of /Jedis, and then write public flux Jedi, Jedis, and inside return flux from iterable Jedis.values. And to add even more to the confusion now, copy the get mapping line, append an ID variable to the mapping, and then write public mono Jedi, Jedi by ID, and then path variable integer ID. And then the method body should read return mono, just or empty, Jedis get ID. So what's going on here? The 2 most important classes in Spring 5's WebFlux framework are Flux and Mono. First, let's have a look at Mono. Again, I'll go into more detail in later episodes, But for now, the main takeaway is that mono is basically similar to a completable future, or in layman's terms, it's a wrapper which will include or rather provide 0 or at most 1 element sometime in the future. Flux is basically the same, but think of it as a stream that will at some point provide 0 to n elements, not just 1 like mono does. And inside the method bodies, you can see that you can actually convert from iterables to fluxes, as well as create monos, similarly to the way you would create optionals. Now, open up the Spring React application class and boot up the application. And after a short while, you'll see in the console that Netty booted up successfully, and also that your 2 REST controller methods got mapped correctly. And now it would actually make more sense to program, say, a WebSocket client to consume your endpoints, but I want to keep it simple here, so open up the REST client, or any REST client. Make sure that the request path is set to /jedis. Execute a GET request, and you'll see your 2 Jedis, Yoda and Luke. And if you append an ID to the path and execute the request again, you'll see that you only get Luke back. So your implementation works. Congratulations, you just took the first steps with Spring's Reactive WebFlux framework. In the WebFlux series that's coming up in early 2018, we'll have a more detailed look at when and why to use WebFlux, how the Lambda-based functional programming model works, what the advantages and disadvantages to Spring MVC are, and much more. So stay tuned.